My journey didn't start off as planned on Thursday and Friday. I was supposed to head to a conference in Minneapolis, but it wasn't the usual warm send-off I was accustomed to. My wife, Claire, normally took half a day off to make my departure special, but this time she just gave me a quick peck on the cheek before hurrying off to work. To give you some background, I'm Sam. I'm 49 years old, and I've been married to Claire for 24 years. We have 2 children, Liam, who is 22, and Olivia, who just turned 20. I began my journey at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, leaving work and heading straight to the airport. I like getting there early for my 6 p.m. flight to avoid the stress of last-minute rushes. Everything seemed to be going smoothly as I waited for the flight announcement. However, luck was not on my side this time. The flight to Minnesota was delayed due to severe weather and a looming snowstorm. After a 45-minute delay, we finally boarded the plane. About 30 minutes into the flight, I noticed the plane making a subtle leftward turn. Initially, I thought it was a minor course correction, but it soon became evident we were turning back. The pilot confirmed that due to the heavy snowstorm, landing in Minneapolis was impossible, and we had to return to our departure airport. Once back on solid ground, I rushed to the airline's check-in desk to rearrange my travel plans for the next morning. Thankfully, I secured one of the last available seats on the next flight. Despite missing the conference, I was determined to make it. As I settled down, a spark of hope ignited, but my plans were still uncertain. I called my contact in Minneapolis to update them about the delay and left a detailed message on my boss's voicemail. Feeling anxious, I decided to call home, hoping to hear Claire's comforting voice. To my dismay, she didn't answer, and the house was dark with her car missing from the driveway. Leaving my luggage in the car, I cautiously entered the house. The sound of voices from the living room surprised me, but it turned out the TV had been left on. This realization led me to a troubling conclusion. Claire had come home after work, and I distinctly remembered turning off the TV before I left. Silencing the TV, I searched for any sign of her but found none. Anxiously, I dialed her mobile phone. When she finally answered, her voice was warm as she inquired about my whereabouts, a question that had become a routine part of our marriage, now tinged with a strange mix of concern and curiosity. She claimed she was at home watching TV shows. As she spoke, the exhaustion from my long journey began to catch up with me. All I wanted in that moment was to be with my wife, seeking comfort in her presence and sharing a few intimate moments, even if just for a short while. Despite the flight delay, I clung to the hope of spending a few unexpected joyful hours in the comfort of our own bed. However, within mere seconds, the joy of being home was overshadowed by a deep sense of uncertainty. Instead of anticipating a warm embrace from the woman I had loved and trusted for 24 years, I was hit with the stark reality of lies and deceit. It was an unforeseen blow that left me speechless and unsure. I couldn't help but wonder if she had truly cheated on me, and if so, why? There seemed to be no logical reason for her betrayal, whether it happened at work with friends or somewhere else. I must have been silent for a while because Claire's worried voice eventually broke through, asking if I was still there. I snapped back to reality and mumbled, yeah, sorry, we've landed in a hare and I have to go. With a heavy heart, I abruptly ended the call. The phone rang again, but I turned it off, craving solitude to process my swirling thoughts. Sitting on the couch, surrounded by silence and emptiness, a numbness washed over me. The question haunted me. Why did Claire deceive me? Perhaps there was a reasonable explanation for the lie. Maybe she was planning a surprise. I remembered how 4 years ago I had orchestrated a series of deceptions for our 20th wedding anniversary. I had secretly arranged a 2-week cruise and involved her boss and parents weaving an intricate web of lies. Those memories flooded back, adding to my confusion. In the midst of my turmoil, one persistent thought crept in, which I vehemently rejected, not us. We wouldn't be in this situation, it was simply unthinkable. But there I was, grappling with the possibility. Realizing that my daughter Olivia might know about any surprises or plans Claire had, I quickly dialed her number from memory. My beloved daughter's voice greeted me on the phone, and she asked how I was. I inquired about her well-being, and she replied that she had just finished her homework and was watching TV. Sensing the importance of the moment, I cautiously asked if she had spoken to her mom recently and if Claire had mentioned anything unusual. Olivia said they had their usual weekly phone call on Sunday, which gave me a glimmer of hope. I then asked if she knew anything about a surprise Claire might be planning. I emphasized to Olivia that I didn't want to know the specifics of the surprise, just whether Claire was planning something. My voice held a note of eagerness as I waited for her answer. Olivia's response, however, dashed my hopes. She mentioned she knew nothing about it and asked what was going on, clearly unaware of my anxiety. Scrambled for a plausible explanation, I told her that Claire had been acting a bit oddly lately, and I wondered if she was hiding a pleasant surprise, perhaps for my 50th birthday. Olivia quickly dismissed the idea, reminding me that we had already celebrated my birthday last month. Realizing I wouldn't get any answers from her, I accepted the reality and wished my daughter a good night. Her dejected reply made it clear that the surprise I hoped for wasn't going to materialize, but the question lingered. Why would Claire deceive me? Various explanations swirled in my mind. Maybe it was related to an upcoming promotion. That seemed plausible, though I couldn't fathom why she'd lie about it. Perhaps she was still striving to achieve that elusive promotion. Lately, she had been staying late at work numerous times due to her dedication. Yet deep down, I knew Claire realized no promotion was worth the time we lost together. She knew I wanted her to cut back on her work hours so we could spend more time together, a request she understood well. Ironically, I recalled an important decision I made a few months before our 20th anniversary. I had turned down a promotion. Nearly 5 years ago, I had enthusiastically accepted a job offer to become the vice president of finance at my company. This role required frequent travel to the company's headquarters in Chicago for board meetings and visits to various factories across the country. Initially, I was thrilled about the job offer, but Claire quickly expressed her doubts, making me reconsider my decision. The cautionary tale of a colleague who went through a divorce just 2 years after accepting a similar position couldn't be ignored. While he gained financial success, it came at the cost of loneliness and suffering. Given our circumstances and the fact that our children still needed guidance and support through their remaining years of school, Claire understandably didn't want to shoulder this responsibility alone. Throughout the week, we had intense discussions about the potential consequences of accepting the promotion. Gradually, it became clear that I was on the verge of losing sight of what truly mattered in my life, my wife and children. Regaining clarity, I made the heartfelt decision to decline the promotion, recognizing that my commitment to my family took precedence over material success. The past few months had been challenging, as Claire pushed hard for her promotion. It rekindled doubts about my own career growth. With our children now in college, it was just the two of us. While Claire believed her promotion was attainable with minimal impact on our lives, such as more business trips, I worried about the extensive overtime she would need to put in. Seeing her for only an hour or two a day during the week left me unfulfilled. Brief moments together didn't bring contentment, and the lack of quality time together weighed on my heart. Claire became increasingly absorbed in her work, spending Saturdays and even Sundays at the office. When she returned home, she was so exhausted that she had no energy for anything else. It had been a while, almost impossible to remember since we last shared moments of intimacy. Specific details blurred into a depressing haze. Acknowledging that age played a role in our diminishing physical connection, it was hard to ignore the sad lack of intimacy we once shared. It's possible her deception during our phone call was an attempt to avoid discussing my concerns and hide behind her work commitments. However, it is only fair to admit that I, too, was often on business trips and had to work overtime occasionally. There was a straightforward way to uncover the truth. I decided to call Claire's direct line at advertising agency to confirm things. To my surprise, her colleague Jack Harper answered the phone. Alarmed, I quickly composed myself, expecting to hear Claire's voice. I greeted him using my nickname, and his response caught me off guard. He mentioned that I should be enjoying a vacation with Claire, shocked and confused by his comment. It was clear something was wrong. That evening, I found myself tangled in a web of surprises. I asked Jack about the supposed vacation. Afterward, I quickly regained my composure, apologized to Jack for the interruption, and fabricated an excuse, claiming I had dialed his number by mistake. He reassured me without any concern, mentioning that Claire owed him lunch for covering her shift and the late working hours. He expressed his frustration, saying it was 9 in the evening and he was still at work. With that, he ended the conversation and hung up. Gradually, the truth dawned on me. Claire wasn't at work. She was, in fact, absent from her workplace. According to Jack, she had taken a vacation until the end of the week. Panic began to grip my mind as fear took hold. Where was Claire? What could she be doing? An unwelcome thought invaded my mind. No, it couldn't be true. I've always strived to see the best in people, maintaining a positive outlook and valuing the inherent kindness in everyone. But now, against my will, I started contemplating the worst-case scenario. Could this really be happening? Could Claire betray me like this? The thought of her being with her sister Isabella crossed my mind involuntarily. Over time, we had distanced ourselves from Isabella and her ex-husband, Alex. Once we were incredibly close, bound by strong friendships that felt unbreakable as our lives intertwined in a beautiful tapestry of shared experiences. We spent evenings together, supported each other, cared for our children, organized numerous family gatherings, and even went on vacations together. But everything changed one fateful day when I returned home with a throbbing headache. Seeking relief from my pounding headache, I took a couple of Tylenol and laid down on the couch. About half an hour later, Claire and Isabella returned from their shopping trip, their laughter and chatter filling the room. They didn't notice me lying there trying to rest. Suddenly, Isabella's voice broke through the noise, asking Claire if she had noticed the new product manager at the grocery store. My heart began to race as I strained to hear Claire's response. She casually admitted that she found him attractive and that he had smiled at her. Then, with a hint of mischief, Isabella remarked that it would be even better if he were smiling after their encounter in the back seat of her car the day before. To my utter shock, my wife replied with disapproval, warning Isabella that she might get caught and risk losing her husband. Isabella, however, shrugged off the concern, assuring Claire that she was always careful. With that, they left the room, leaving me in a state of turmoil. As someone who values honesty and integrity, I was devastated by what I had just overheard. I didn't know what to do and felt completely lost. One thing was clear: Alex needed to know the truth. Hearing about Isabella's infidelity would undoubtedly break his heart, and the thought weighed heavily on me. I knew that Alex would likely kick Isabella out of the house upon learning of her betrayal. The responsibility of potentially causing the collapse of their marriage was a heavy burden. Did I really want to be the one to deliver such life-altering news? Before I could make a final decision, Claire returned home with our children. Comforted by the fact that she disapproved of her sister's actions, I decided to postpone my decision until I could discuss it further with her. That evening, as we were getting ready for bed, I broached the subject, seeking her advice. I cautiously explained the situation, sharing the news of discovering infidelity within our circle. Her expression was initially one of shock and uncertainty as I asked what I should do and whether confronting the cheater with anger was appropriate. Claire took a moment to consider the situation carefully. She began slowly, suggesting that it might depend on the specifics and that various factors needed to be considered. I sought further clarity by presenting hypothetical scenarios, inquiring about our friend Alex and whether we should ignore it if he had been unfaithful and picked up a woman at a bar. I wanted to know her perspective. The weight of the situation hung heavily in the air as I pondered potential actions. Suddenly, Claire sat up in bed, gripping her phone tightly, her face a mix of determination and anger. She was ready to call Isabella and confront her about the betrayal. Instinctively, I gently took the phone from her and told Claire that I would handle the situation myself. Claire looked at me with doubt and concern, asking what was going on. I responded with confidence, assuring her that I was certain of my decision and hoped that Isabella would face the consequences of her actions. Claire, looking resolute, affirmed that we wouldn't let Alex stay with us if he decided to kick Isabella out. She declared firmly that he could find his own place and that she wouldn't harbor a cheater in our home. With a sense of determination, I called Alex, he answered, his voice filled with warmth as he greeted me, his favorite son-in-law. I began with a heavy sigh, trying to find the right words. After taking a deep breath, I cautiously continued, warning him that I had overheard something troubling and had some devastating news to share. I told him that Isabella hadn't been faithful and cheated on him just the previous day. There was a long pause on the phone as Alex absorbed the shocking revelation. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible, filled with disbelief. He asked if I was absolutely sure it was his Isabella. I confirmed that I had heard it directly from her mouth, describing it as a boast without any hint of remorse. Offering my condolences, I assured him of our support and told him that we were there for him and the kids. Alex thanked me and hung up the phone, leaving me feeling the weight of the situation. Claire looked at me, her eyes filled with sadness and tears. She whispered that she was proud of me and asked for a hug. Feeling lost and scared, I embraced her, offering what comfort I could in the face of such uncertainty. After a moment of calming down, I suggested that they might consider seeing a therapist to help navigate the situation. Claire, weary and doubtful, mumbled that she wasn't sure therapy would change anything, mentioning that once someone is strained, they tend to do it again. I quietly agreed with her. In the middle of the night, the phone rang, waking me from a restless sleep. I answered it groggy and trying not to disturb Claire. On the other end was Isabella, her voice furious and demanding to know what I had told Alex. I responded calmly, telling her that I had told Alex the truth and emphasized the importance of honesty. As Claire watched with concern, Isabella's voice grew more angry, accusing me of betrayal. I firmly replied that sometimes the truth comes out in unexpected ways and that cheaters should face the consequences of their actions. Isabella's sobs echoed through the phone as she confessed that Alex had thrown her out of the house. I reiterated that this was a consequence she deserved. Desperately, she begged for advice, asking if she could stay with us. Reluctantly, I told her that we couldn't offer refuge to someone who had betrayed their spouse and that she would have to manage on her own. She seemed stunned by my response, her pleas becoming more frantic. I turned to Claire for support, asking her what to say to Isabella. Claire leaned towards the phone and firmly declared that she didn't want a cheater in her house and told Isabella to find somewhere else to stay. I then delivered a final message on behalf of both of us. Isabella was no longer welcome in our lives and she should stay away. We didn't want her to visit her call. Claire snuggled closer to me and we sought comfort in each other's arms. She whispered that she was proud of how I had handled the situation and we peacefully drifted off to sleep. The next morning, however, brought an unexpected confrontation. Claire's father called, his voice filled with rage, demanding to know why we had turned our backs on Isabella. Claire, shaken and tearful after the call, looked to me for reassurance. I reminded her that we had made this decision together after much discussion, and that it was necessary to end our association with someone who had caused so much pain. I clarified that I had only mentioned a hypothetical scenario about Alex, and hadn't suggested he actually cheated on Isabella. I posed a challenging question asking how Alex's potential betrayal differed from Isabella's infidelity. Claire defended her sister, stating that Isabella was family. I expressed my disappointment, questioning if it was acceptable to excuse cheating just because they were family. Claire was momentarily silent, unable to justify her stance. 3 years ago, I had a critical conversation with Claire, making it clear that I didn't want Isabella near our children or in our home. Although Claire occasionally met her sister secretly, it was an unspoken taboo in our household, and she visited Isabella covertly while I was away. Over time, Alex managed to move on and prepare for remarriage, and my resentment toward Isabella faded. I had stopped caring about her presence, finding solace in her absence. Turning my attention back to Claire, I gently approached the subject, feeling the need to resolve the issue. I suspected that Claire might feel guilty for deceiving me, though I had reached a point where I no longer cared. Unexpectedly, I found myself on stage in front of a vast audience at a conference. I began my speech addressing the crowd and discussing 2 types of individuals, those who deny reality and those who confront it. During my talk, Dan Parker, Claire's boss, waved his hand wildly and admitted to avoiding my wife. Jack Harper, seated behind Dan, also confessed to dodging Claire. Another man joined in with a cheeky comment, creating a moment of shared amusement and light laughter among the audience. Suddenly, I woke up on the couch, wiping through my face. It was already midnight. I must have slept for over an hour, and I wondered if Claire had returned home during my nap, possibly unaware of my presence. Hastening toward the bedroom, I entered but found no signs of her. It dawned on me that she might be with her sister Isabella, contemplating whether to contact Isabella and inquire about Claire's whereabouts. I hesitated, realizing that obtaining Isabella's address would involve acting behind Claire's back. Remembering that I needed to pick up Isabella's children from a specific location, I wondered if I still had her phone number. As I prepared to search my contact list, I noticed the Find My Phone app icon on my smartphone. A year ago, I had installed it on both our phones after losing mine during a trip from New York to Cincinnati. Recognizing its potential, I promptly opened the application. Within seconds, I received information about Claire's phone's location. It indicated Mills Lake. I was puzzled, wondering why she would be there. Isabella was facing financial difficulties, making it unlikely for her to afford a cottage on Mills Lake. The situation grew increasingly mysterious. Mills Lake was known for its upscale residences, with cottage costs far exceeding those of our modest home. Using Google Earth, I carefully pinpointed Claire's exact location. To my surprise, she was inside an exclusive estate surrounded by an imposing stone wall. This revelation left me baffled. What could Claire be doing in such a luxurious millionaire's estate? The distance between Mills Lake and our town was an hour's drive, but my determination to uncover the truth propelled me forward. Realizing that a direct conversation with Claire would likely result in dishonesty or evasion, I decided I needed indisputable evidence before confronting her. Fluttered with intense emotions, I quickly headed to Mills Lake, chastising myself for not considering the possibility of Claire's wrongdoing earlier. Regret knotted me as I realized I should have checked her phone's GPS locator right from the start, instead of making excuses for her actions. Uncertainty clouded my thoughts as I arrived at Mills Lake, unsure of my intentions but harboring a faint hope for a straightforward explanation. Anxious, I made my way to the estate where Claire was located. A massive gate loomed before me, barring direct access. I wasn't planning to drive up to the house and announce my presence. Assessing the situation, I understood that parking by the road might attract unwelcome attention, possibly leading to security guards or law enforcement in this exclusive community. Driving a bit further, I stumbled upon a narrow path and decided to park there. Stepping out, I felt a surge of uncertainty. How would I bypass the towering wall separating me from the truth? Then it hit me. The estate bordered the lake, meaning I could approach from that side. With renewed determination, I began to make my way toward the lake, ready to uncover whatever truth awaited me. I made my way to the lake shore, my heart pounding as I searched for a way into the estate from this direction. Discovering a narrow path leading toward the water, I cautiously moved forward, unsure which grand cottage Claire might be in. I decided to rely on another check of the GPS locator. Eventually, I reached a luxurious mansion with several second-floor windows still lit. Though the ground floor was dimly illuminated, only one curtain remained slightly open, casting a warm glow outside. Seeking a better vantage point, I found a sturdy tree and climbed high enough to peer inside. My gaze settled on a man in a white tarry cloth robe, older and unfamiliar to me, who quickly vanished from view. Moments later, a woman emerged, and my suspicions were confirmed. It was Isabella. She stood in an open robe, sipping champagne. Despite everything, I couldn't deny that she still looked attractive for her age. As I watched, the pieces began to fall into place. Claire was indeed with her sister, likely drawn into a lifestyle I disapproved of and didn't want for her. The implications of a divorce and the financial strain it could bring seemed to explain Isabella's actions. However, I couldn't help but feel Claire was getting entangled in something destructive. Events unfolded before my eyes that left me disheartened. The man I had seen earlier approached Isabella, his hands exploring her body, as he took her champagne glass and set it aside. I had to avert my gaze from this blatant display, feeling my traditional values clash with what I was witnessing. This was not the love and intimacy I cherished. It felt hollow and devoid of any real connection. Just as I contemplated climbing down from the tree, I saw Claire. She sat on a distant couch wearing a foolish, inebriated smile. Her robe was open, revealing a sight that sealed the fate of our marriage. Overwhelmed by shock, I took a step backward and lost my footing, tumbling from the tree. Branches broke my fall, and I was fortunate to escape with only minor injuries. Dazed, I got to my feet, feeling the weight of what I had witnessed. I wandered aimlessly back to my car, tears welling up in my eyes. The pain I felt was not from the physical fall, but from the emotional devastation of losing someone I loved. As I limped to my car, I briefly considered breaking into the mansion to confront them, but I quickly dismissed the idea. The potential consequences, years in prison for trespassing and assault, made it clear this wasn't the answer. Alone with my thoughts, a storm of emotions raged within me. I could no longer deny the harsh truth. The sadness and anger were overwhelming, but I knew I couldn't let the anger consume me. No matter how betrayed I felt, I would never resort to physical violence against Claire. As I considered my options, I realized the simplest one was to return home, pack my belongings, and leave. If we lived in a no-fault divorce state, had separate incomes, and no dependent children, the process would likely be straightforward. We would divide our property and part ways. Yet a part of me yearned for justice in some form of revenge. A bold idea took hold. I decided to seize the moment and see how it played out. Clutching my phone tightly, I dialed Claire's number, anticipating that she might not answer and I'd be directed to her voicemail. I hoped she'd check it right away. "Hi, honey." I began projecting my voice onto the answering machine. "Since you didn't pick up the home phone, I'm calling you on your mobile. I wanted to let you know not to be alarmed when you hear my keys in the door in a few minutes." I explained the chaos of my flight being delayed by a blizzard and the uncertain arrival times. I told her our flight had been diverted to Chicago, but that we were finally on our way back. They couldn't pinpoint our exact landing time, but I estimated I'd be home in about 30 minutes. I said goodbye and hung up, knowing Claire would receive a notification of a new voicemail. Curiosity and anxiety would undoubtedly nod at her. Leaving a message at that time was unusual, adding to the intrigue. I pictured her reaching for the phone, eagerly checking her voicemail. I silently prayed that she was too intoxicated to notice the impossibility of using a mobile phone during the flight. Panic must have been setting in as she realized she might be ensnared in her deceitful web. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. I quickly answered, realizing she might be trying to gauge my time of arrival. I began the conversation with a weary tone, apologizing for potentially waking her up. She replied, assuring me it was okay, and informed me she was on her way home, expecting to arrive in about an hour. I acknowledged her response, and she ended the call promptly. I soon saw her car exiting the estate gates and speeding down the highway. My heart skipped a beat as I watched her reckless driving, nearly swerving into a ditch. It became evident she was much more intoxicated than I initially thought. Although I felt anger and frustration, I also felt a deep sadness at what our relationship had become. Seeing Claire's reckless driving, I was struck by the realization that she was endangering not only herself, but also everyone else on the road. Despite my anger, the thought of her life being in jeopardy, especially as the mother of my children, was unbearable. Determined to ensure her safety, I decided to follow her, ready to intervene if necessary. Quickly, I called emergency services to report a drunk driver. I described her erratic behavior, near collisions, and reckless swerving, providing details about her car, including its make, model, and the last 4 digits of the license plate. I emphasized the urgency of stopping the car before it caused harm. The operator assured me that a patrol car was on its way. Keeping a safe distance, I continued to follow Claire, navigating through traffic carefully. 2 exits later, I saw a patrol car approaching. As Claire's car came into view, the patrol car accelerated, lights flashing, signaling her to pull over. I drove past them, feeling a mix of relief and deep sadness. 45 minutes later, I arrived home, the weight of the evening's events pressing heavily on me. The irony and tragedy of the night struck me hard. In a single evening, someone I had loved deeply had reduced her life to a series of unfortunate consequences. The thought that Claire's actions could have led to a fatal accident, an unimaginable grief for our children, was sobering. This realization made me pause and reflect, allowing my fears and emotions to surface. Life's fragility and preciousness had never felt more real. My love for Claire was no longer the guiding force in my decisions. It wasn't that I had stopped loving her, but I could no longer see a future for us together. I needed time to gather my thoughts, so I turned off the home phone and silenced my mobile. As I reflected on the evening, I realized that the simplest explanation for Claire's deception had been in front of me all along. Disappointed in myself for not seeing it sooner, I opened a bottle of wine and contemplated my next steps. For years I had believed that my love for Claire would age like fine wine, growing richer and deeper over time. Confronted with the harsh reality of our strained relationship, I now faced the difficult question of what to do next. As I sipped the wine, I searched for clarity amidst the whirlwind of emotions. The love that had once been the foundation of our life together now felt like it had turned to vinegar, leaving me in agonizing pain. Her betrayal cut deeply, but it wasn't just the act itself that hurt. It was the realization that the love we had shared for 26 years, 24 of them as husband and wife, had withered away. Without her, I felt lost, like a soul adrift, devoid of purpose and identity. Could I continue without this love? The pain intensified, and I briefly considered finding solace in the depths beneath the bridge, a place where I could escape my suffering. Starting a new life felt like an insurmountable challenge filled with uncertainty. How do you plan your future when the person who has been your everything is suddenly gone? I was at a loss, unsure where to begin. Making decisions without consulting Claire seemed impossible. Family had always been my focus. Every choice I made was carefully considered for the well-being and happiness of my wife and children. Our social life revolved around our family, and I rarely engaged with colleagues outside of obligatory work events. Over the past decade, I occasionally reminisced about the times we socialized with colleagues. Now, with the kids gone, it was just Claire and me. And now I found myself alone, engulfed in sadness. I had no one to love, no one to lean on. For the first time in my life, loneliness became my unwelcome companion. Why did she choose this path? Why resort to cheating when a straightforward divorce, though painful, would have been more considerate of the years and joyful moments we shared? When did she stop loving me? Did she merely endure our relationship until our children were grown and gone? When did her care and attention fade? As our children embarked on their own journeys, I saw it as an opportunity to invest more in Claire and our relationship. I didn't realize she saw it as the end of our shared path. I watched as a stranger became a constant presence in her life, suggesting a level of comfort or perhaps deception that had infiltrated our lives. Claire and her lover, leaving me isolated and unloved, made it clear we were no longer a couple. In the midst of despair, my pain became a connection to life. It served as a painful reminder of what I had lost, the best moments we shared, and most importantly, the presence of our children. In that dark moment, my children became my saviors, casting a glimmer of hope upon me. My self-esteem had plummeted, and I lacked the strength to lift myself out of the abyss. Just thinking about Liam and Olivia provided a faint spark of self-preservation. Soon, Liam and Olivia would start their own families, and to shield myself from the impending wave of grief, I realized I needed to distance myself from it all. It wasn't an easy task, and it was filled with pain. I understood that I'd always carry the memory of Claire and how I loved her, but I'd also remember her betrayal. I needed to extricate myself from this situation. As I continued to drink, I pondered the future. Despite the pain, I knew I had to move forward, even if the path was unclear. The love that once defined me was gone, but I still had my children and a life to rebuild. I resolved to find a way through the darkness, holding on to the hope that, with time, I would heal and find a new purpose. I had always been content with a simple life. My family wasn't wealthy, but we had something far more valuable, deep affection. The material possessions that now surrounded me seemed insignificant in comparison. As I contemplated everything I owned, I realized that only a few items, a change of clothes, my car, and my laptop, were worth taking with me. The more I thought about it, the clearer my path became. I decided to pack my belongings and disappear without a trace. I could no longer face the woman who had once been my everything, as each encounter would only remind me of my loss and the constant ache within me. With a renewed sense of purpose, I stood up and began to act decisively. I swiftly packed several bags, a task that took only 30 minutes. Soon I was loading my things into the car. By the time I finished, it was just before 6 a.m., exhausted but determined. I decided to take a brief nap, confident that Claire would still be in detox until late in the morning. When I closed my eyes, my thoughts were filled with the idea of starting anew. My phone's alarm woke me at 9 a.m. Without hesitation, I scheduled an urgent meeting with a lawyer. Following that, I took a long shower, hoping to wash away the remnants of my past. With a heavy heart, I removed my wedding ring and placed it solemnly on the table next to the phone. This final act marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one where I sought personal freedom and happiness. I decided to write a letter to Claire, expressing my disappointment and sorrow. Although our conversations had become futile, I felt the need to convey my emotions. Claire, it breaks my heart to acknowledge that you have chosen a path of reckless promiscuity and loneliness, much like your sister. By the time you read this, I will have removed myself from your life entirely. The depth of your betrayal has left me an unimaginable pain. Despite everything, I am grateful for the 24 years of happiness we once shared and for our 2 wonderful children. In this farewell, I will be brief. May you quickly return to your new life, leaving behind our broken family. I crave the justice you couldn't provide. Did your actions bring you any satisfaction? The man you were with, judging by his mansion, was wealthy. I no longer wish to see or speak with you. We have nothing left to discuss. Our lawyers will handle everything, and I ask that you promptly sign the divorce papers. The reason for our separation is of no importance. By 10 a.m., I was at the bank, addressing our shared credit card debt and closing the accounts. I withdrew our entire savings and securities, ensuring there were sufficient funds in the checking account to cover the mortgage and utility bills for the next 2 months. Taking further steps toward independence, I removed my name from the joint account. Upon leaving the bank, I held a substantial check amounting to approximately $250,000. Before noon, I arrived at work, surprising my boss, who expected me to be in Minnesota. When I shared the news of my immediate resignation and relocation, his surprise grew. Our relationship had evolved from a typical employer-employee dynamic into one of mutual respect and understanding. My boss had kept his position because I turned down a promotion, feeling indebted to me. During his divorce 2 years ago, I explained that my decision was influenced by his situation. Since then, our relationship had become more of a partnership. He understood my desire to resign and accept it. Instead of going through HR and dealing with my $401,000, he offered me an opportunity in their newly established division in Texas. Although the salary would be lower, the affordable housing options would enable me to start fresh. We sealed our agreement with a handshake, and he agreed to spread the word that I had left voluntarily. Next, I met with my lawyer to explain my decision to separate from Claire. I instructed him to serve her with the divorce papers and grant her power of attorney to sell the house, which represented half of our assets. My lawyer, who was also a close family friend, tried to persuade me to consider alternative options, but he soon realized the significance of the changes I was making. By midnight, I planned to be in another city, in another state, and without a wife. By the afternoon, fatigue overwhelmed me. I sought a place to rest and found a dated motel around 8 o'clock in the evening. Feeling the weight of the day's events, I checked in, looking forward to a few hours of uninterrupted sleep. As I lay on the bed, I reflected on my decision and the new life ahead. The pain of the past was still there, but I hoped that with time it would fade, and I would find a way to rebuild and heal. Using a disposable phone I had bought for this very reason, I dialed Liam's number. He answered quickly, and I informed him that this was my new number. His voice immediately filled with concern as he asked if I had heard from Mom. I took a deep breath and revealed the painful truth. I had discovered Claire's infidelity the previous day. Liam was stunned, his disappointment and worry palpable through the phone. He asked what I intended to do next. I explained that I had already taken action. I packed my belongings, cleared out our joint bank accounts, resigned from my job, and was heading south to start a new chapter. I assured him that Claire would receive the divorce papers by the end of the week. Liam, still processing the news, asked if Olivia knew. I told him she didn't yet, but I promised to keep him informed and to call regularly. We exchanged words of love and support, and I reassured him that I would look after myself. Ending the call with Liam, I steeled myself for the next conversation and dialed Olivia's number. The sadness in her voice was heart-wrenching as I shared the devastating news about her mother's betrayal. She, too, struggled to comprehend how Claire could inflict such pain on our family, similar to what Aunt Isabella had done. Olivia, always straightforward, broke the silence with a painful question. "Dad, how long has this been going on? When did we stop being enough for her?" I tried to comfort her, explaining that the duration and reasons no longer mattered. What mattered was that I had loved Claire deeply and trusted her completely, and she had shattered that trust. I reassured Olivia that I would be okay. I admitted that I was incredibly sad, but believed that with time and distance from her mom, I would heal. I promised to share my new address and told her she could visit once her school year was over. Tears welled up in my eyes as I made this promise, wanting Olivia to know that she would always have a place with me. Arriving in Tucson, I found a small but welcoming optics division with only 30 employees. The district manager, a kind-hearted man with a fatherly demeanor, fostered a sense of camaraderie and comfort within the team. I immediately felt welcomed, which provided some solace during this tumultuous time. A month later, I chose a charming house in a quiet condominium complex. Throughout this period, I maintained no contact with Claire, relying solely on updates from my lawyer and my children. Navigating this new life wasn't without its challenges. One particularly difficult situation arose when my lawyer informed me that Claire was prepared to contest the divorce. She was unwilling to let go and ready to fight to the bitter end, even if it meant financial ruin for both of us. In response, I calmly instructed my lawyer to cease pursuing the divorce. I told him I no longer cared and wanted to give her the chance to rebuild her life after the 24 years we had shared. I asked him to convey to Claire that I had no desire to continue our relationship and wished her well. Additionally, I added a more pointed message, asking my lawyer if he could tell her to go to hell. Recognizing our close connection, he agreed, but warned there would be an additional fee. Conversations with my children were even more challenging. One by one, I had to convince them that there was no turning back. The first major hurdle arose when Olivia told me, "Dad, Mom completely freaked out when I mentioned that I planned to live with you this summer." I promised Olivia that I would do my best to visit her and her grandparents, but her reaction was so concerning that I found it necessary to step away from my phone for a few days. Claire's behavior worsened when Liam decided to split his summer between both of us. As for Claire, I consciously refrained from asking about her, focusing instead on moving forward with my life. It wasn't easy because remnants of my feelings for her still lingered, tied to our shared past before the betrayal. With my children's help, I gradually learned more about Claire's state of mind. To my surprise, she was going through a deep depression, mirroring the emotional turmoil I had once experienced. It was astonishing considering what had happened to her sister. When you cheat, it devastates those you should love, leading to the destruction of your marriage. Afterward, you move on with your life. So how could Claire be depressed when I had done everything possible to enable her to continue without me? Her reluctance to divorce seemed like an escape from reality, a way to avoid facing the fact that her actions had caused our family to crumble. It was absurd. For a while, I was in denial myself, but she had been living in denial for the past 2 years. Even though she knew our children were in regular contact with me, she used them to express remorse for her actions. Through them, she tried to convince me that she was willing to do anything to prove her love. Although I understood that our children hoped for reconciliation, I couldn't bring myself to talk to Claire. The geographic distance between us was also an issue, forcing them to choose between their mother and me. Claire was relentless in her pursuit of my whereabouts from our children. All she knew was that I lived in one of the southern states. It had been almost 3 years since I left her, and she finally managed to discover my location. One fateful day as I was leaving work, I spotted her lurking near the office. I couldn't fathom how she had found out where I now resided, as I had tried to keep that information strictly confidential. Based on what my children shared, Claire was convinced that a face-to-face meeting would change my mind. Determined to correct her misconception, I quickly and discreetly slipped out through a side door, my heart racing. I called Grace to let her know about the situation in my plan. I positioned myself where Claire could see me, leading her to follow as I navigated through the city. I stopped at a grocery store, making a show of mundane errands, and eventually returned home. As I pulled into the driveway, Grace, a beautiful 30-year-old Latina, opened the door with a 1-year-old baby in her arms. Claire, who had followed me, parked nearby and hurriedly approached the house, clearly confused by the sight. From my place in the kitchen, I watched Claire's astonishment as Grace greeted her with a warm smile and a distinct Spanish accent. "Can I help you?" she asked politely. Claire, visibly taken aback, stammered that she needed to speak with me. Grace called out to me, and I took the baby in my arms as I approached the door. "Well, well, well." I began with a mix of surprise and irony in my voice. "What brings you here after almost 3 years, Claire?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she whispered that she needed to apologize, confessing how deeply sorry she was for the pain she had caused. She admitted that her actions were her own foolishness and expressed her love for me, describing me as the best husband and father a woman could hope for. Though her words were sincere, I knew it was time to end this charade. "It's all right," I replied, feigning happiness. "All of this is in the past. I've moved on, and I forgive you." I glanced at the baby in my arms, her innocent joy radiating, and continued. "I wish you a joyful life filled with love, much like mine." Claire's tears flowed freely as she mumbled something unintelligible. She hesitantly stepped forward, embraced me briefly, and then hurriedly left the house. I closed the door behind her, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. Grace, sensing my fragile state, gently took the baby from my arms and hugged me tightly. She kissed my forehead and then reached for the phone. "I need to let Nathaniel know that I'll be heading back home with our daughter soon," she said, with warmth and confidence. "Thank you, Grace," I whispered, deeply appreciative of her support. "Make sure to tell him I'll be waiting for you at the barbecue on Saturday." "Absolutely, boss. I'll see you at the office tomorrow," she replied with enthusiasm. The following week, my lawyer received the signed divorce papers from Claire. As I moved forward, I realized that healing takes time and that I needed to find my own pace. I formed connections with several female friends, engaging in casual relationships without serious commitments. Gradually, I shed my nervousness and timidity around women, recognizing my personal growth. I began to think it might be time to let Grace introduce me to someone special, someone who could bring genuine happiness back into my life. However, after this unexpected encounter with Claire, doubts crept in. Not about leaving her, as that decision remained firm, but about my previous assumption that we had nothing in common. I had always believed we had nothing to discuss, thinking she understood my stance on infidelity and how I would react. But listening to fragments of Claire's story during our brief conversation made me wonder if I had avoided a necessary confrontation. Despite my aversion, removing myself from her life had been the best course of action. It allowed me to find peace and recover away from the toxic environment that had engulfed us. I loved Claire so much that if I had encountered her at my most vulnerable moment, I might have succumbed to her remorse and accepted her apology, leading to more suffering and an inevitable divorce. Now, 3 years after her betrayal and our separation, her apology gave me a sense of closure. It released me from the lingering pain and offered a glimmer of hope for love once more. Over time, I might even consider revealing that I don't actually have a second daughter, though I'm not certain I'll ever decide to do so. I no longer owe her anything, and the choice to disclose or keep it to myself is mine alone. I finally unburdened myself of obligations to her, allowing me to move forward and embark on a new chapter in my life, but not for long. Yesterday, I stood by Claire's grave with my children and numerous relatives, including Isabella. I wept bitterly like everyone else present, but I didn't see a single tear on Isabella's face. Claire, in a state of complete despair and inebriation, had been involved in a fatal accident. Her life couldn't be saved. I contemplated for a long time why Isabella had encouraged her sister into a reckless relationship and arrived at only one explanation. It was revenge. Revenge for Claire and me revealing Isabella's betrayal, which had led to the end of her marriage with Alex. Perhaps now Isabella feels some sense of relief as her sister lies in a casket. And I know one thing for certain. I will never love any woman the way I loved Claire.